Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, April 8th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Donald Trump's abortion stance and how he has flip-flopped over the past couple of months about his stance on a national abortion ban. Earlier on this year, Donald Trump suggested in private that he supported a 16-week ban on the national level, but ultimately announced today that it is up to the states and declined to endorse an overall ban. Now, the reason why this is significant is because it shows a clear change in Donald Trump's abortion policy since the beginning of this campaign season. From 2016 and in 2020, Donald Trump reiterated on multiple occasions that he was unapologetically pro-life, and insinuated and explicitly said in some cases about his belief that abortion should be regulated, and in some instances on the federal level. Essentially was saying that while he wouldn't sign that bill into law immediately, he would very much consider it and actively wanted to see Roe versus Wade overturned, which is what happened in 2022 when he was no longer in the presidency. Now, he has touted for a very long time now, since the passage of, or since the declaration from the Supreme Court in the Dobbs v. Jackson decision that abortion could be regulated on the statewide level. He has now made this his really big thing, that this was his legacy, that he is the man who got rid of Roe versus Wade, but that clearly wasn't a winning strategy point for Democrats back in 2022. We remember looking at those election results and genuinely wondering, why is it that voters voted against the Republican Party despite it being what was meant to be a very strong year for the GOP? And it ultimately came down to this issue of abortion that became really prominent in a number of different states where it really might not have been expected to be as prominent in years past. For instance, in a state like Michigan, abortion was immediately put on the ballot due to a really draconian law from the 1800s that had outlawed abortion in the state that had just been there sort of as a trigger law that Roe versus Wade prevented from taking into effect. But then when Dobbs v. Jackson happened, it actually was implemented in the state of Michigan. And so when abortion became an issue on the ballot in Michigan, it drove Democratic turnout quite significantly, drove Democrats out to the polls, allowed them to get there to vote, registered a significant number of women, registered a significant number of Democratic voters. People that were aligned with the Democratic Party on the issue of abortion showed up in this race. And it wasn't just Michigan. It was Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Minnesota and Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona, and in a number of states where the governors had a direct impact on what could or could not be done on the issue of abortion. But it also translated to a congressional way because there was all this conversation about a national abortion ban. All of this conversation about if Republicans take control of the House, they very well may endorse and pass a national abortion ban. The overwhelming majority of these Republicans in the House and in the Senate are pro-life, and what's to say that they wouldn't do something like this if given the opportunity? But Donald Trump now seems to be pulling a little bit away from that, actually receiving some criticism from some pro-life groups across the country. Now, one thing is clear. These pro-life groups are going to vote for him regardless of what his stance is on a national abortion ban. Does this mean they would be as enthusiastic to support him? Not necessarily, but that really doesn't matter. Pro-life voters and pro-life organizations rarely ever vote Democrat, and in some instances that they do, you're really talking about a subsection of Catholic suburbanites that are pro-life but still pro-Democrat. And it's a unique intersection, but pretty much extends only and solely there. There are certainly some minority groups, though, that you do see, especially, families with immigrant parents or immigrant parents who now have U.S. citizenship who vote that also are pro-life because of the way that they were raised or just generally their association with Christianity or Islam, whatever it might be, right? There are certainly voters out there that do vote blue. I will say, though, one thing we know for sure is that the overwhelming majority of pro-life voters vote blue. And so when Donald Trump makes stances like this one, it is really only in an effort to win over centrist voters. It's only in an effort to win over voters on the independent column, right? And that makes sense. He's pivoting for the general election. The Republican primary is over, and we're heading full steam ahead into a rematch election between him and President Biden. The only fundamental problem here for Donald Trump is that based on where he was on this issue in 2016 and 2020, the distancing now really doesn't make much a difference. Voters very much associated the 2022 midterms with Donald Trump. They associated him as somebody who had overturned Roe versus Wade, and his impact on these races was certainly felt in ways that he had endorsed Dr. Oz for Senate in Pennsylvania, Blake Masters in Arizona, Adam Laxalt in Nevada, Don Bolduc in New Hampshire, Herschel Walker in Georgia. All the states I've mentioned are all states where Donald Trump had a direct impact on the Republican primary in those states, and the majority of them gave those nominees a very easy pathway to the nomination, and all of them ended up losing on Election Day. And while Donald Trump may not necessarily have been the only association that voters had with them, it was certainly very prevalent. He visited all of these states. He made a point to visit them because he wanted to take credit for their eventual victories if they had them. And so when he was coming out there and they were touting all this rhetoric on the issue of abortion, they didn't know how to talk about it correctly. Voters were very angry about the Dobbs v. Jackson decision and arguably are still today. In fact, the numbers, and I think this is the reason why you're seeing a pivot and not the stance that he took around 2 months ago when this article was released, around March, actually, weeks ago even, in private, talked about this back in February. So for a while now, we've been seeing and hearing from the internal Trump team, from sources close to Donald Trump, that he does, support a national ban here. I think the numbers here are narrowing up. And I think this is an undeniable fact. You can even see it on the average here. This is the narrowest the presidential margin has been on the generic or the general election polling since October of 2023. And so you're talking 6-7 months down the line here that we are now waiting to see Joe Biden and Donald Trump get to a really narrow position. But the 0.3% advantage that Donald Trump has, I think, is really warning the Republican Party here that the lead that has been lasting for quite some time now is not as strong as it once was. I mean, even back in January of 2024, just 2 weeks before Donald Trump had, said privately to his donors, to his advisors, that he did support a 16-week ban. At that point in time, he had a 4-point advantage over Joe Biden on the national average. At one point in time, 4.3%. I mean, it was super significant and it mattered so much because it was at a point where the general election was pretty much very similar. We knew who the nominees were going to be, and Democrats were worried, terrified, because Donald Trump had had his largest lead he has ever seen on the national average, his first time taking the lead since after the 2016, RNC, and maintained it for months on end, and still today, and not to downplay this, he still has the lead, and if the election was held today, I do believe Donald Trump would win. But this narrowing of the race cannot be ignored, and it means here that Donald Trump can't afford to lose any more voters. We've been talking a lot about this ceiling for Donald Trump, that Joe Biden has room to grow, Donald Trump does not, and I think that's true. Because when you look at the numbers that Joe Biden has seen, he really was never at this high of a point, right? The only other time, maybe around this time, March of 2023, he was hovering around where he is today. But even now, he stands at a higher point. Joe Biden has gained votes. In about a year, you've seen him gain around 1% nationwide. That's significant. It's certainly not insignificant. Donald Trump also has gained quite tremendously. But he's maxing off. He's never been higher than 48%. He certainly has never been in the majority, and that matters. It matters so much that I think when we get closer to this general election, if he never reaches above 50%, he probably won't be winning the national popular vote, even if he's ahead when it comes down to the overall average here. Because we do know that voters tend to lean left on the national level. They lean towards Joe Biden. They lean towards Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. Republicans actually have not won the popular vote in the 21st century except for once, and that was in 2004 with George W. Bush. And so, not to go back that far back, but I will say that the issue of abortion, too, in every presidential election since 1976, including 1976, has not been a prevalent issue. That's because the Roe v. Wade decision had lasted nearly 50 full years before being struck down by the United States Supreme Court, and it made, shockwaves across this country. And it certainly did for this presidential election. I'm not going to act as if abortion is the only issue that voters are voting on in this race, but it certainly is one of them. And it certainly was one of them back in 2022. Down with all the naysayers from 22 who said that abortion wouldn't matter to voters, because ultimately it did, especially in states that had abortion referendums on the ballot. And now guess what? Montana has one in 2022. Nevada will have one. Florida now has one, right? You have a lot of these issues where abortion is going to be on the ballot in 2024, and that will matter for the outcome of the race. Because I think looking at what has inspired Democratic voters the most over the past 2 years, it's not Joe Biden. It's not Kamala Harris. It's not the economy. It's not healthcare. It's not immigration. It's abortion. That has been one of their sole major fundraising points and has been a consistent thing that we have seen since 2022, since the Dobbs v. Jackson decision. And I think it is going to be a very, very real thing here, that will become the main reason why Democrats do well in a number of these congressional, gubernatorial, and presidential races. And it isn't just contained to swing states that abortion will be on the ballot too. When we take a look at the New York House races in 2024, chances are New York is going to have, an abortion referendum on the ballot here. And, it's going to be quite interesting. It's not going to be explicitly abortion. I think that what New York right now is considering is something related to equal protection and, prevention of gender-based discrimination, but also looping in abortion in, many terms. I'm interested to see, because New York is going to be an interesting point here. I'm getting a little bit off track here, but I want you to be made aware that New York probably is going to see some, maybe up-ballot effects of having an abortion referendum on the ballot here. Arizona. Looks like right now they're going to get enough signatures to get Arizona to have an abortion referendum on the ballot. That would be quite interesting. Biden won the state by 0.21% in the last race, 31%. So it'll be very, very interesting. It is popping up potentially in states like Colorado, Missouri, Arkansas, and it'll be quite interesting. Montana is expected to have one. The attorney general there is no longer able to block it, according to the Montana Supreme Court. In Nevada, it looks like there's going to be one. The signatures are there. And so, again, we're talking about these states. We're talking about ones where abortion will probably make it, more likely than not in those states. I know Pennsylvania, there was some conversation. I don't think it's going to make it on the ballot there. Regardless, though, this issue matters. And I think you can see it clearly here that the numbers in their declining state for Donald Trump, he is responding to it by taking a more center-right approach to the issue of abortion. He is taking a more moderate approach that he believes is better situated for independent voters. And I do agree. I think that leaving it up to the states is certainly more preferable than to having a national abortion ban. While it may be disappointing to pro-life groups, they will still always vote for him. The same cannot be said for independent voters, where you have Donald Trump out there encouraging a national abortion ban. I will say, though, again, this distancing is extremely, extremely hard. It comes at a point where it might not even matter and might not even sway voters, and they may not even believe him on this issue. In the same video in which he announced his stance on abortion on Truth Social, he said he was proud to be the man that got rid of Roe versus Wade. He handed the Biden HQ, and the fact they've already done rapid response on it, they've handed the Biden campaign ammunition to take down the Trump campaign with ads that are circled around this issue. The problem for the Republican Party, too, is that the overwhelming majority of this nation aligns with the Democratic Party on abortion. 60 to 70% of this country is a self-identifying pro-choice person, right? That is exactly what their problem is. That isn't to say at all that 60 to 70% of this nation will vote solely on abortion and will vote for Democrats because of the issue of abortion. But what I am starting to see here is a pattern. That in elections where there seems to be very, very important issues, and not to downplay them at all, but I certainly think that we're at a point where some of these issues are still going to be grouped into abortion. You care about the economy and abortion. You care about immigration and abortion. You care about healthcare and abortion, right? A lot of these things that we saw happen in 2022 when they did the exit polls. What matters most to U.S. voters? Abortion sometimes ranked in the bottom, of the top 10 at 8, 9, or 10. But it was coupled in, because the economy did matter to voters, maybe as their most important thing, but second came abortion, or another issue, and then abortion, right? And that was really what I think drove Democrats out to the polls in 2022. While they certainly cared about some things, they were willing to put that to the side in many instances, because the economy arguably was not as good as it is today in 2022, right? The President Biden's approval rating was abysmal in 2022, and support for the Democratic Party was at an all-time low over the past 6 years. And yet somehow, miraculously, they were able to expand seats in the Senate, nearly maintain the House, and win more governorships than were even predicted that they would have the opportunity to win in. And so when I see this from 22, I look at 2024 again through that very, very similar lens here. But I think Donald Trump is trying to do it right this time by taking a stance that is significantly more popular than a national abortion ban. The problem is, though, he has been so closely associated with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and these articles are not going to be lost on voters. The Biden campaign will remind voters constantly and always that it is Donald Trump who overturned Roe versus Wade, and it is Donald Trump who initially sought a national abortion ban. That it is Lindsey Graham, who is a Trump surrogate, a Trump superfan now, who put forward a bill in the U.S. Senate last year to implement a national abortion ban. Implement one even in 2022 during these early conversations. They handed Democratic candidates, groups, whatever it might be, ammunition to take down the Republican Party, And they did exactly that. And I think Donald Trump is very much trying to curtail that this election. The question is, do voters see right through it? And chances are they probably will. I also think on the final note here that this flip-flop on the issue of abortion is an acknowledgement that the numbers aren't moving in the right direction. Because Donald Trump is always so exceptionally adamant that he will continue campaigning the way he wants to, continue saying the things he wants to when he believes he is up politically. And I think that's why, for a long time, these past 6 months, when the lead has been riding high, when there haven't been major fundraising concerns, when there haven't been major polling concerns, when there haven't really been as much, negative press and coverage on Donald Trump because he just isn't president this time around and isn't the shock factor candidate from 2016 that he could do and say whatever he wanted to. But I think he's now realizing that's no longer the case. And I think voters are also realizing that their support for Donald Trump a month ago, 2 months ago, 6 months ago, is not as high as it is today, and that's why you're seeing this lead narrow on the national level. And the question is, over the next coming days, does Biden win on the generic, ballot here, or general election data? I guess that's the way we could call it, the generic. Sorry, why am I doing this? The general election Trump versus Biden matchup. I'm interested to see if Biden does, in fact, come back to a point where he's in the lead for the first time, I think, since October 19th. Oh, no, September 10th. 2023. So 8 months coming. We'll see if it happens. It may or may not, but time will tell. And I think Donald Trump is telling us here that his flip-flop on the issue of abortion is in response to declining polling numbers and an indicator that Biden's chances are now going up. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.